The Devereaux mansion was lit up with festive lights, illuminating the prestigious Buffalo neighborhood on a cold October evening. Jamal Devereaux's 40th birthday was celebrated with a grandeur that only a successful banker of his stature could afford. In the spacious living room with high ceilings, a jazz quartet filled the space with soft melodies, creating an atmosphere of refined luxury. Waiters in white gloves glided between the guests with trays of canapés and champagne, while Jamal's personal chef worked his magic on the final touches of the 7-course dinner. Kesha Devereaux, the 35-year-old wife of the guest of honor, was the picture of elegance in a form-fitting black dress that accentuated her slender figure. The diamond earrings, a gift from her husband for their 5th wedding anniversary, sparkled in the light of the crystal chandeliers. Her perfect smile never left her face as she moved gracefully among the guests, filling glasses and engaging in small talk. Her every movement was precise, like the choreography of a complex dance which she had been performing for many years. "Attention, please." Kesha's melodious voice silenced the guests. "I would like to propose a toast to my wonderful husband. Jamal always said that the most important thing in success is a stable home. Here's to you, my dear. Here's to another 40 years of success." Her voice sounded steady and confident without a single tremor. The guests murmured approvingly and raised their glasses. Jamal, in his perfectly tailored suit, approached his wife and kissed her gently on the cheek. His hand squeezed her waist possessively, a little tighter than the moment required. None of the guests noticed that Kesha held her breath for a split second. "My beautiful wife," Jamal said, addressing the guests. 5 years with her have made me who I am today. Without her, I would only be half the man I am." The banquet continued. Jamal's influential banking partners, local politicians, and the cream of Buffalo society enjoyed a flawless evening. Kesha knew every guest by name, remembered their children's names and interests, and asked all the right questions. When she stepped away for a moment to check on the dessert in the kitchen, one of the guests remarked, "What a perfect couple. Jamal and Kesha are made for each other." The party lasted until midnight. Gradually, the guests began to leave, thanking the hosts for a wonderful evening. With each departing car, the mansion grew quieter until only a small group of close friends remained, mostly Jamal's colleagues from the bank. Andre Lafontaine, vice president of investments, stayed behind the longest, discussing an upcoming bourbon deal with Jamal, a glass in his hand. Kesha, tired but not showing it, sat nearby, occasionally adding comments to the conversation. Once she caught Andre's gaze, worried, questioning. But as always, he quickly looked away, returning to the discussion of financial schemes. "We should wrap it up, old man," Jamal said, finishing his whiskey and patting his friend on the shoulder. "I have another special gift for you today from my beautiful wife, right, honey?" Kesha nodded, her face as calm as the surface of a frozen lake. Andre rose awkwardly, avoiding her gaze. "Of course it's late," he said, glancing at his watch. "Have a great evening, Jamal. Happy birthday again." The men hugged, and Andre headed for the door. Kesha walked him to the door. "Good night, Andre," she said quietly. He paused for a moment, as if he wanted to say something, but only nodded and quickly left, leaving the couple alone in the huge mansion. "Clean up here," Jamal said, nodding toward the living room where glasses and plates remained. "And go up to the bedroom. I'm in the mood to keep celebrating." There was a note in his voice that Kesha knew all too well, authoritative, brooking no argument. She nodded quietly and began clearing the dishes while Jamal went upstairs, whistling a jazz tune that the musicians were playing. Kesha methodically cleaned the living room, gathering glasses and wiping invisible stains. Her hands moved mechanically, her eyes staring through the objects. The house was silent, broken only by the ticking of an antique clock in the hall. When she had finished cleaning, she slowly climbed the marble staircase with its perfectly polished banisters. On the way, she stopped at a closed door, his home office, the only room in the house she did not have access to. A faint light shone from under the door. In the bedroom, decorated in cream and gold tones, Jamal was already waiting, reclining on the huge bed with a glass of whiskey. He had taken off his jacket and tie, but remained in his shirt and trousers. "What took you so long?" he asked irritably. "I'm sorry, I wanted everything to be perfect," Kesha replied as she entered the room. His gaze slid over her appraisingly, lingering on her diamond earrings. "Come here." 3 hours later, at 3 o'clock in the morning, the silence of the mansion was broken by screams. First, male screams, loud, surprised, full of pain and disbelief. Then, silence, absolute, ringing silence. Patrol officers Robert Johnson and Tamika Davis were the first to respond to the call. Neighbors 2 houses away heard the screams and called the police, concerned about the unusual noise in such a quiet and prosperous neighborhood. The driveway to the Devereaux mansion was paved with expensive stone, with neatly trimmed bushes growing on both sides. The front door of the mansion was ajar, and a dim light was burning in the hall. "Buffalo Police!" Officer Johnson shouted, keeping his hand on his holster. "Anyone home?" There was no answer. Exchanging glances, the officers cautiously moved deeper into the house. The spacious living room was immaculately clean, with no signs of a struggle. Crystal glasses sparkled on the shelves, and the cushions on the sofas were perfectly fluffed. Only the faint smell of alcohol and perfume reminded them of the recent party. "Let's check the upper floor," whispered Officer Davis, pointing to the stairs. When they reached the second floor, they saw a hallway with several doors. A strip of light was visible under one of the doors at the end of the hallway. "Police!" Johnson shouted again, approaching the door. Receiving no answer, they cautiously opened it, keeping their weapons at the ready. On the king-size bed, covered with silk sheets, lay a man in a burgundy robe, drenched in dark blood. 4 stab wounds to the chest and neck had turned the once luxurious garment into a shapeless, wet rag. Next to it, leaning against the bed, sat a woman in a nightgown, also stained with blood. In her hand was a large kitchen knife with a wooden handle. "Don't move! Drop the weapon!" Officer Davis commanded, pointing his gun at the woman. Kesha Devereaux slowly looked up, as if only now noticing the presence of the police. There was no fear or panic in her eyes. She slowly put the knife on the floor and raised her hands. "I killed him," she said calmly, enunciating each word clearly. It had to end. Officer Johnson approached the body and checked for a pulse, although it was obvious that the man was dead. Officer Davis handcuffed Kesha and read her rights, noting to herself the suspect's strange calmness. Usually crime scenes were different: hysterics, denial, attempts to flee. But Kesha Devereaux accepted her arrest with the same detached calm with which she might have accepted a grocery delivery. Detective Lamont Griffin arrived at the scene 40 minutes after the call. By that time, the Devereaux mansion was filled with forensic investigators, photographers, and other specialists. The blue and red flashing lights of police cars were reflected in the windows of neighboring houses, where concerned neighbors watched the proceedings from behind thick curtains. As he approached the house, Griffin noted the affluence of the neighborhood: large lots separated by hedges, manicured lawns, and luxurious colonial-style homes. It was a typical place where, according to the neighbors, nothing like this ever happens. Griffin, a tall, 45-year-old man with an attentive gaze and a neat beard, climbed the stairs, nodding to his colleagues. 20 years on the Buffalo police force had taught him one thing: behind every perfect door could lie a world of nightmares. In a luxurious, cream-colored bedroom with large windows overlooking a well-kept garden, Jamal Devereaux's body was being examined by medical examiner Dr. Nzinga Oluwafemi, a woman with a straight back and a focused gaze, whom even complex murders could not throw off her professional poise. "What do we have, Doc?" asked Griffin, putting on latex gloves. 4 stab wounds, replied Dr. Oluwafemi, without taking her eyes off the body. 2 in the chest, 1 in the neck, and 1 in the heart. The third one went straight into the aorta. Death was almost instantaneous from blood loss and shock. Time of death was approximately 2:30 a.m., give or take half an hour. Griffin carefully examined the room, noting details. It was a luxurious bedroom with antique furniture and works of art on the walls. An expensive wool carpet had absorbed the victim's blood. On the bedside table was a crystal whiskey glass, half empty. The bedding was expensive, embroidered with the initials JKD. "Where's the wife?" he asked Officer Johnson, who was taking notes by the window. "In the living room downstairs under guard. She confessed herself didn't even try to run or resist," Johnson replied. She's very calm, almost trance-like. Griffin nodded and went downstairs. In the spacious living room, decorated in light colors, Keisha Devereaux sat on a white leather sofa. She had already been changed into a white uniform jumpsuit. The blood washed from her hands, but several dark spots remained on her neck and in the corners of her fingernails. The woman's gaze was distant, her back perfectly straight, her hands folded in her lap. "Mrs. Devereaux, I'm Detective Lamont Griffin from the Homicide Division," he introduced himself, sitting down in a chair opposite her. "Have you been read your rights?" "Yes," she replied quietly but clearly. "I killed my husband. I don't deny it." Griffin took out a notepad and pen. "Can you tell me what happened tonight?" "It had to end," she said, looking past the detective as if she saw something behind him. "It was the only way it could end." "What exactly had to end, Mrs. Devereaux?" Keisha didn't answer, just kept staring ahead with the same distant expression on her face. But Griffin, who had learned to read people over the years, noticed something strange in her eyes. Not the remorse or shock he usually saw in murderers immediately after a crime, but something more like relief. "You were celebrating your husband's birthday today, weren't you? Were there any conflicts during the party?" "It was Jamal's birthday," she confirmed in an even voice. "He turned 40. No, there were no conflicts." All the guests enjoyed the evening. Jamal was happy. "Do you want to contact anyone? Relatives, friends, a lawyer?" "I have no one," Keisha replied, meeting the detective's gaze for the first time. Her dark eyes were empty. "Only Jamal. He was." Griffin made a note in his notebook. It was unusual for a woman of her status and position not to have a social circle. "Your parents?" "They think I'm crazy," she said emotionlessly. "Jamal convinced them of that 3 years ago." Griffin made another note, sensing that there was something significant behind those words. After finishing his preliminary questioning, the detective continued to search the house with the forensic team. In the process, he noticed several small details that had not been immediately apparent. In the corner of the living room, above the bookcase, was a small camera, cleverly disguised as a decorative item. After checking the other rooms, he found similar devices in the kitchen, dining room, and even in the bathrooms. There were especially many of them in the bedroom, 5 different cameras installed at different angles to cover the entire space. "Hey, Miles," he called to one of the technicians. "Look at this. The whole house is rigged with surveillance cameras." The technician approached, examining the tiny device. "Strange, they don't look like ordinary security cameras. They're too small, too well hidden. Maybe it's a security system," suggested Griffin's assistant, a young detective named Ray Parker. "Then why are there cameras in the bathroom and bedroom?" Griffin shook his head. "And why are they pointed at the bed instead of the windows and doors? Look for a server or a recording device." Returning to Keisha, Griffin asked more questions about her life with Jamal, but received only short, mechanical answers. When he asked how often she left the house, Keisha stared at him for a long time before replying. "Jamal preferred that I stay home," she finally said. "He said there were too many dangers for me, too many temptations. He cared about me." The last word sounded like a rehearsed phrase she had repeated many times. "And how did you feel about that?" Griffin asked cautiously. "I was a good wife," she replied in the same even tone. "Jamal always said I should be grateful to him for taking care of me." One of the detectives called Griffin into Jamal's study, which was next to the bedroom. Unlike the other rooms, which were decorated in light colors, the study was finished in dark wood and leather. A massive mahogany desk, bookcases filled with business literature, and a leather armchair that seemed to hold the imprint of its owner's body. "Detective, you have to see this," said the forensic scientist, pointing to a powerful computer on the desk. "We found the center of the entire video surveillance system. All the cameras in the house transmit their signal to this computer." Griffin stepped closer. The monitor screen displayed a password prompt. Next to it was an external hard drive with a label and several flash drives. "All the recordings were stored here," the forensic expert continued, pointing to the equipment. "Judging by the labels on the files and the list of recent connections, the recordings were made every day, around the clock, for the last 3 years. Everything is encrypted. It will take time to gain access. Griffin looked around the office thoughtfully, trying to understand the motives of the deceased. Why would a successful banker, a respected member of society, need to record his wife's every move? What was hidden behind the facade of this perfect marriage that had been on display to the guests at the birthday party today? "Seize the computer and all storage devices," he ordered, "and find me a list of everyone who was at the party today, especially this André Lafontaine, who left last. Judging by everything, he's a close friend of the family." Returning to the patrol car, where Kesha Devereaux was being prepared for transport to the station, Griffin caught her eye. For a moment, he thought he saw something like hope flash across her face, the first real emotion he had seen all evening. Sunlight streamed through the blinds in Detective Lamont Griffin's office the morning after the murder. The detective sat immersed in the preliminary materials of the Devereaux case: crime scene photos, initial statements, personal information about the victim and the suspect. It all added up to a picture that made no sense. A perfect couple, a successful banker and his beautiful wife, living in a luxurious mansion. And then a sudden brutal murder. "What's the latest on our suspect?" Griffin asked when his partner, Detective Ray Parker, entered the office. "She spent the night in a cell. She didn't ask for anything, didn't talk to anyone. The public defender tried to talk to her, but she barely responded," Parker replied, placing 2 cups of coffee on the table. "She's been scheduled for a psychiatric evaluation. She may be in shock or have dissociative disorder." Griffin nodded thoughtfully, remembering the strange, detached expression on Kesha Devereaux's face. It wasn't like shock, more like a kind of numbness that was slowly wearing off, as if she were waking up from a long nightmare. "What about her family?" Griffin asked. Keshia's mother and father live in Atlanta. When they were told, her father said something like, "So that's how her madness ended." They hadn't spoken to their daughter in 3 years, since she had, in their words, become mentally unstable and dangerous. Jamal convinced them that she needed isolation and his personal supervision. "Anything about her past? Before she got married?" "Kesha Taylor, 35 years old," Parker began, leafing through the records. "Studied at Cornell, degree in art history. Worked as a curator at the Buffalo Museum of Art. Colleagues described her as talented and outgoing. 5 years ago, she married Jamal Devereaux and quit her job almost immediately. She was last seen in public about 3 years ago. After that, she virtually disappeared from social life. Friends tried to contact her, but all attempts were redirected to her husband, who explained that his wife was undergoing treatment." Griffin frowned. The story was taking a disturbing turn. "What about the cameras? What about the recordings?" "The tech department is working on cracking the password. So far, no luck. It's heavily protected, not like a regular home computer." At that moment, Griffin's phone rang. It was Dr. Oluwafemi from the morgue. "Detective, you should come here. I found something interesting during the autopsy." 30 minutes later, Griffin stood in the cool morgue, looking at the body of Jamal Devereaux. Dr. Oluwafemi, in her usual composed manner, pointed to various marks on the victim's body. "See these scars on the knuckles?" she said, pointing to the victim's hands. "These are typical marks from repeated blows with a fist. They're usually found on boxers or people who fight a lot." "Maybe he was a boxer?" Griffin suggested. "Possibly, but there's something else." The doctor led him to another table where photographs were laid out. "These are the photos taken during the examination of Kesha Devereaux. Take a close look." Griffin took the photos and felt a heavy weight building inside him. Keshi's body was covered in scars, some old and some more recent. Her ribs showed signs of improperly healed fractures, and her back was covered in thin white lines from cuts or blows. Her hands bore the marks of repeated trauma to the wrists, characteristic of violent restraint. "Most of these injuries were never treated professionally," Oluwafemi explained. "The fractures healed on their own, without medical intervention. Based on the nature and location of the injuries, I can say with certainty that this woman was subjected to systematic physical abuse over a period of several years." Griffin nodded slowly, the picture beginning to come together. "We need to question her again, and find this André Lafontaine." André Lafontaine turned out to be a tall, well-dressed man of 42, with the polished appearance of someone accustomed to success. Sitting in the interrogation room, he looked both upset and irritated. "I don't understand why I'm here," he began when Griffin entered the room. I already gave a statement to the patrol officers. I was just at a friend's birthday party. Left around midnight, and that's it. Mr. Lafontaine, were you close to Jamal Devereaux? We were friends and colleagues for over 10 years. I can't believe he's gone. Andre's face contorted with pain, and that he was killed by his own wife, the woman he gave everything to. What kind of relationship did they have? Did you notice anything unusual? Andre frowned as if the question annoyed him. Jamal was a model husband. Everything Keshia had, she had thanks to him. She never appreciated him enough. What do you mean? Jamal pulled her out of a provincial museum and gave her a luxurious life, and he hesitated. Keshia had problems, psychological problems. She could be unstable, have strange fantasies. Jamal protected her, hid her condition from society. Can you imagine how that could have damaged his reputation? But he never abandoned her. What kind of fantasies? Griffin asked, taking notes. She accused Jamal of watching her, controlling her. Once she even said that he was hurting her. Andre snorted. That's ridiculous. I know Jamal. He would never raise a hand to a woman. And yet there were hidden cameras installed in the house in every room. Andre's face froze for a moment. That was for her safety, so she wouldn't hurt herself when she was alone. Why didn't she leave the house? Griffin continued. Why did she cut off all social contact? She couldn't cope with society, Andre replied quickly. Her condition was deteriorating. Jamal consulted with the best specialists, but they recommended home care. Name those specialists, Griffin demanded. Andre hesitated. I don't remember exactly. Jamal took care of that. Griffin slowly opened the folder and placed photos of Kesha's body with numerous signs of trauma in front of Andre. Does this look like self-harm? He asked quietly. On her back, on her wrists, with distinctive marks from handcuffs? Andre looked away. I don't know. Maybe it was... Her mental state was complicated. Mr. Lafontaine, Griffin's voice hardened. Did you ever witness Jamal mistreating his wife? A long pause. Andre stared at the table. He was my friend, he finally said quietly. My best friend. That's not answering my question. Once... Andre spoke so quietly that Griffin had to lean closer. Once I showed up unannounced. Jamal didn't know I was coming. I heard screaming from the bedroom. Kesha was crying, begging him to stop. When I got up, he was furious. Her face was covered in blood. What did you do? Nothing. Andre exhaled, looking at his hands. He said it was a family matter, that she had provoked him, that she had episodes where she banged her head against the wall. And I believed him. Or I forced myself to believe him. For the sake of our friendship, for the sake of our work. God knows I tried to convince myself that he was telling the truth. Griffin was silent, giving Andre time. After that, he became more careful. He always made sure Kesha looked good when she appeared in public. And then she stopped leaving the house altogether. Back at the station, Griffin discovered that the tech department had managed to hack into Jamal's computer. The camera footage confirmed his worst fears. On the monitor screen, Griffin saw episodes of abuse, Jamal beating his wife for the slightest infractions, such as talking too long with a guest or using the wrong tone. There were also scenes of sexual violence so severe that even the seasoned detective looked away. This went on for years, said the technician, looking through the file labels. He kept all the recordings in chronological order, like some kind of twisted collection. Did you find anything else on the hard drive? Email correspondence with Kesha's parents, friends, and former colleagues. He wrote on her behalf, telling them about her illness, that she had become dangerous and was hallucinating. Gradually, everyone stopped trying to contact her. Griffin sighed heavily and headed to the women's prison where Kesha was being held. She had been transferred from her cell to the medical ward after injuries were discovered. She sat on a hospital bed, staring out the window. When Griffin entered, she didn't turn around. Mrs. Devereaux, he began softly, we found the records and signs of injury on your body. We know what happened. She slowly turned to face him. Something new appeared in her eyes, a glimmer of awareness, as if she were truly beginning to wake up. Do you believe me? She asked quietly. Yes, I do. Griffin replied sincerely. "I'd like to hear your story, the whole story from the beginning." Keisha was silent for a long time, gathering her thoughts, then began to speak. At first quietly and uncertainly, but gradually her voice grew stronger. "We met at a museum. He came to a contemporary art exhibition. He was charming, attentive. He courted me beautifully. Flowers, restaurants, concerts. He proposed after 3 months." She smiled sadly. "I thought it was fate, a fairy tale prince." She told how Jamal began to change after the wedding. At first it was little things, criticizing her clothes, complaining if she was late from work, being jealous of her colleagues. Then he insisted that she quit her job at the museum. The wife of a successful man shouldn't work. The first blow came 6 months after the wedding. She was 15 minutes late for dinner. He apologized, cried, said it would never happen again. Her voice became monotonous, as if she were talking about someone else. And then it happened again, and again, and it got worse and worse. Jamal installed cameras to watch her every move. He took her phone. He restricted her access to the computer. Gradually, he cut off all her contacts with the outside world, spreading rumors about her instability. He convinced my parents that I had a mental disorder, that I was a danger to myself. They believed him, not me, she said bitterly. The last time I spoke to my mother, she said I should be grateful to Jamal for caring about me, that I was lucky to have such a patient husband. Griffin listened, writing down every word. Kesha's story was one of gradual, methodical destruction, isolation, manipulation, violence, and all of it was hidden behind the facade of a perfect marriage and a respectable life. "I tried to leave several times," she continued, "but he always found me. The last time, 2 years ago, he broke my ribs and said that if I tried to run away again, he would kill me. I believed him." "What happened on the night of the murder?" Griffin asked cautiously. "It was my birthday. It went perfectly, just as he wanted. When everyone left, he was in a good mood. But then," she paused, "he found the sketchbook I had hidden. I drew when I was alone. It was the only thing I had left. He flew into a rage. That night, the violence was particularly brutal. Jamal beat her and then fell asleep. Kesha realized that she might not survive the next time. I went to the kitchen to get a knife. It was the only solution I could see, the only way out." Griffin nodded. Her story matched the evidence, the video recordings, the medical reports, Andre's testimony. As he was leaving, the detective received a message from the team searching Devereaux's house. "In the basement," Parker told him on the phone. "We found a hidden room behind the wine cellar. You need to see this." An hour later, Griffin stood in a small, windowless room, hidden behind a false wall in the basement of a luxurious mansion. The room contained chains embedded in the walls, various instruments of torture, and, most horrifying of all, a professional camera on a tripod pointed at the center of the room. "We found the recordings," the forensic scientist said quietly, handing Griffin a hard drive. "He tortured her here, and he filmed everything." At that moment, Griffin finally understood what had really happened in this house. Behind the facade of a perfect marriage lay a living hell, and the woman who had committed the murder was simply trying to survive in the only way she knew how. Detective Griffin's office was littered with materials from the Devereaux case. Photos, diagrams, and timelines hung on the walls. In the corner stood a cardboard box containing Kesha's diaries, 6 notebooks in plain covers, hidden in various places around the house, behind a ventilation grill, under a floorboard in the closet, inside a thin copy of Jane Eyre on the bookshelf. Griffin spent 2 sleepless nights immersed in the horrific details of a life hidden behind a flawless facade. Now, on the morning of the 3rd day of the investigation, he was gathering all the evidence, preparing to present it to the prosecutor. "Detective, the results of the video analysis are in," Parker said, entering the office with a thick folder. "The technical department confirms. No signs of tampering. All recordings are authentic." Griffin nodded. He had no doubt about the authenticity of the recordings, but legal procedure required an official conclusion. "What about the accounting documents?" he asked, rubbing his eyes, which were sore from lack of sleep. "Complete financial strangulation," Parker said, placing another folder on the table. "Jamal Devereaux controlled every penny. Kesha didn't have access to a single account, not even the family account. All the cards were in his name and all expenses went through him, a classic case of financial abuse. Griffin opened Kesha's first diary, which covered the early period of her marriage. The handwriting was neat, the letters even, the writing of a confident person. She described her hopes, plans for the future, and minor everyday difficulties with optimism and humor. But after a few months, the tone of the entries changed. Doubts and anxiety appeared. Jamal got angry again because of dinner. He said I was deliberately ruining everything. Today, for the first time, I was frightened by his gaze, so cold, as if I were not a person, but a thing. In the following diaries, the handwriting became increasingly nervous, uneven, with strong pressure, the writing of someone under constant stress. He hit me. He said it was my fault. Maybe he's right. My parents don't believe me. They say I'm exaggerating, that Jamal cares about me. If my own mother doesn't believe me, who will? The last diary entry, found in a broken copy of Jane Eyre, was written in a trembling hand, with gaps and blots, as if the writer had often stopped to hold back tears or pain. The basement again today. I can't describe it. I don't want to remember. He says he loves me, that it's all for my own good. I don't know what's real anymore. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. Please find out the truth. Please believe me. Griffin closed the diary and reached for his cup of cold coffee. Outside, it was a rainy autumn day, typical for Buffalo at this time of year. Raindrops drummed on the window, creating a monotonous background noise for the detective's dark thoughts. "Lamont, we have a meeting with Keshi's parents," Parker reminded him, glancing at the schedule on his phone. "They flew in from Atlanta last night. They'll be here in 20 minutes. Griffin nodded, gathering his materials into a folder. He had a difficult conversation ahead of him. Robert and Evelyn Taylor looked like a typical, respectable, middle-aged couple. He was a graying economics professor with an attentive gaze. She was an elegant woman with the bearing of a dancer and a tense expression. They sat in the visitors' room, holding hands, clearly nervous. "Mr. and Mrs. Taylor, I'm Detective Lamont Griffin. I'm investigating your daughter's case," he introduced himself, sitting down opposite them. "We want to understand what happened," Robert Taylor said, his voice trembling. "Jamal always seemed so caring. He said he was doing everything he could for Kashia, for her treatment." "Treatment?" Griffin asked. "What kind of treatment?" "For her psychological problems," Evelyn replied uncertainly. "Jamal said that Keshia developed a serious disorder after she got married, that she became paranoid and aggressive. He showed us recordings of her episodes, letters from doctors." Griffin opened the folder and took out several documents. "Mrs. Taylor, these letters are fake. The doctors whose signatures appear on the documents do not exist, and the recordings are carefully edited videos of Kesha simply trying to defend herself from being beaten." Evelyn pressed her hand to her mouth, her eyes filling with horror. "We found your daughter's diaries," Griffin continued, carefully handing the notebook to the parents. "She tried to tell you the truth, asked for help, but Jamal intercepted all her calls and letters, responding on her behalf." Robert Taylor began leafing through the diary, his face growing paler with each page. "My God," he whispered. "We were so sure. He showed us the bruises, said she was banging her head against the wall during her seizures. We believed him, not our own daughter." "There were hidden cameras installed in the house," Griffin said. "We've recovered the footage from the last 3 years. It shows numerous instances of physical, psychological, and sexual abuse. Jamal Devereaux methodically destroyed your daughter, isolated her from society, convinced everyone she was insane, and completely controlled every aspect of her life." Evelyn Taylor burst into tears, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Robert hugged his wife, his face frozen in an expression of deep, unbearable shame. "We should have known," he whispered. "We should have sensed it. She never lied to us before. Never." "Your daughter survived conditions that would have broken most people," Griffin said gently. "And she still needs you. She has a long road to recovery ahead of her." That same morning, Griffin met again with André Lafontaine to show him the full extent of the evidence against his late friend. The interrogation room looked sterile, like a hospital. White walls, a metal table, hard chairs. Andre sat hunched over, his eyes dull, like a man whose world had just fallen apart. "You were right, detective," he said quietly, looking at the folders containing the evidence. "I knew it. Deep down, I always knew Jamal was lying about Kesha's condition. But it was easier to believe him." Griffin played one of the recovered video files, a recording from the bedroom dated 2 years earlier. On the screen, Jamal was methodically beating Kesha for looking at the waiter too long during a rare outing to a restaurant. "This was on Jamal's birthday 2 years ago," Griffin commented. "Do you remember that night?" Andre nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the screen. "We were all there, at Le Bistro. Kesha looked so quiet, almost scared. I thought then that it was just her weirdness that Jamal had talked about." Griffin paused the video. "What happened after the restaurant?" "We went home. The next day, Jamal showed up with a bruise on his cheek. He said Kesha had thrown a fit and attacked him. After that incident, the doctors recommended keeping her at home." Andre covered his face with his hands. "But in reality, she was fighting back, trying to defend herself." The recording Griffin showed was just one of hundreds. Technicians reconstructed a 3-year timeline of systematic abuse documented by Jamal himself. But the most horrific footage was from the basement room where, according to the psychiatrist who worked with Kesha after her arrest, acts of torture that cannot be described in legal terms took place. "Why didn't you say anything earlier?" Griffin asked. "After you caught him beating her?" Andre was silent for a long time, gathering his thoughts. "Fear," he finally said. "Jamal knew too much about my financial schemes. He could have destroyed my career. But that's just an excuse, isn't it?" He looked up at the detective. "The truth is, I was a coward. I turned a blind eye to other people's suffering to preserve my own comfort. My friendship with a man I considered successful and influential." Griffin recorded Andre's statement, which was now added to the growing body of evidence. By noon, the picture of what had happened was completely reconstructed, every piece of the puzzle falling into place. Jamal Devereaux, a charismatic and successful banker, a respected member of society, was behind closed doors, a monster slowly destroying the woman he supposedly loved. Psychiatrists who studied the case suggested he had a sadistic personality disorder, narcissism, and a pathological need for control. His victim, Kesha, survived years of isolation and torture, losing touch with the outside world and nearly losing her own identity. And on the night of his 40th birthday, she finally found the strength to end it all. Griffin personally delivered all the materials to the district attorney's office. Linda Warren, an experienced prosecutor with a reputation as a tough but fair professional, carefully examined the evidence. "Self-defense," she concluded, closing the last folder. "Not just self-defense, but a classic case of battered woman syndrome. No jury in the world would find her guilty after what this woman has been through. But technically, it was premeditated murder," Griffin pointed out. "She waited until he was asleep. After a particularly brutal beating, knowing that the next one could be her last," Warren parried. "It wasn't revenge, detective. It was survival, the only path to freedom available to her after all others had been cut off." 2 weeks later, the trial to decide Kesha's fate took place. The courtroom was packed with journalists, activists, and ordinary citizens shocked by the details of the case that had leaked to the press. Kesha Devereaux sat at the defense table, visibly changed over the weeks. She was still thin, with dark circles under her eyes, but there was a liveliness, an awareness in her gaze. Next to her were her parents, holding their daughter's hands as if afraid of losing her again. Prosecutor Warren presented the court with a complete set of evidence: medical reports, video recordings, diaries, witness statements. Particularly striking was the testimony of Andre, who, despite the threat of prosecution for complicity through inaction, decided to tell everything he knew about his friend's double life. Jamal Devereaux created the perfect image of a caring husband, heroically rescuing his mentally ill wife, Warren told the court. And all of us, friends, relatives, society, accepted this image without question, because it was easier, because the truth was too terrible to believe. When it was Kesha's turn to testify, the courtroom fell silent. Her voice, at first quiet and uncertain, grew stronger as she told her story. Not isolated episodes of violence, but a story of systematic destruction of a human being, of a free woman being turned into property, into an object. "He took everything from me," she said, staring straight ahead. My family, my friends, my job, my dignity, even my name. He always called me my wife, never by my name in public. I became a ghost in my own life. And then I realized that soon I would become a ghost literally. That night after my birthday, he said I had become too much of a burden, that he was tired of me, of my tantrums and madness. She described the last episode of violence, how Jamal beat her after the guests left, threatening to finally solve the problem, how she lay on the bathroom floor, realizing that time was running out, that she had to act now or never. When he fell asleep, I went to the kitchen and took a knife. I hadn't made my own decisions in so long that I had almost forgotten what it was like to choose for myself. But at that moment, I knew exactly what I was doing, and why. The judge, an elderly woman with an attentive gaze, listened without interrupting. When Kesha finished, the courtroom was so quiet that you could hear the ticking of the wall clock. The court takes into account the exceptional circumstances of this case, the judge said after deliberation. The evidence presented irrefutably demonstrates the years of abuse suffered by the defendant. Considering the clinical assessment of her psychological state at the time of the crime, as well as the threat to her life, the court finds Kesha Dever's actions to be self-defense in a situation of immediate threat to life and health. All charges are dismissed. When the judge announced the decision, Kesha did not show any signs of joy. Her shoulders relaxed slightly and a tear rolled down her cheek, the first real display of emotion during the entire trial. Leaving the courthouse amid camera flashes and shouts from journalists, she held her parents' hands, looking not at the crowd but at the sky, the gray autumn sky of Buffalo, which she had not been able to look at freely for so long. "What now?" asked one of the journalists, pushing his way through the security guards. "What are you going to do next?" Kesha paused for a moment, looking at the reporter with an expression that was difficult to read, a mixture of exhaustion, realization, and perhaps the first glimmers of hope. "Live," she replied simply. "I'm going to learn how to live again,